Ask most senior men about their retirement accounts, and they'll tell you the numbers without much hesitation. Ask them about their mortgage, their pension, even their monthly budget. They'll walk you through it. But ask the right question, quietly, to the right man, and you'll discover something else entirely. A second account, a smaller one. One his wife might not fully know the size of, one his children have never heard mentioned, one that exists for exactly one purpose, the day everything else falls apart. Most people assume this is secrecy, maybe even distrust within a marriage or family. It isn't either. It's one of the quietest, most deliberate habits a wise senior man builds, and once you understand why, you'll probably want to start one yourself. Seneca wrote something that reads almost like financial advice, disguised as philosophy. The wise man never relies on fortune. He wasn't warning against optimism. He was warning against dependence, the quiet trap of building a life so tightly wired to a single plan, a single income, a single expectation of how tomorrow will go, that even a small disruption becomes a crisis. A man who relies on fortune is a man who has handed his peace of mind over to circumstances entirely outside his control. A man who prepares for fortune's absence, instead, keeps that peace, regardless of what actually happens. The private emergency fund is Seneca's warning, made literal. A man refusing to let his entire sense of security rest on a single plan, working out exactly as expected. There's real psychological and financial research behind why this private reserve matters so much, and why so many wise senior men build one quietly, without fanfare. Behavioral economists studying prospect theory have found that people feel the pain of an unexpected loss roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. A man who's lived long enough has felt that asymmetry directly, the sudden medical bill, the failed transmission, the leaking roof, that all seem to conspire to happen in the same difficult month. A private reserve doesn't just cover the cost, it cushions the psychological blow, turning a potential crisis into a minor inconvenience he's already prepared for. There's also something psychologists call ego depletion, the idea that stress and financial uncertainty draw down a person's limited pool of mental energy throughout the day, leaving less available for good decision-making elsewhere. A man without a private cushion tends to make his other financial decisions from a place of quiet anxiety, second-guessing every purchase, every risk, every generous impulse. A man who knows there's a reserve waiting, untouched, makes those same decisions from a place of calm, because the worst-case scenario has already been accounted for. The Fidelity Retirement Study has consistently found that the retirees who report the highest confidence aren't necessarily the wealthiest by total assets. They're the ones with clearly defined emergency reserves, separate from their day-to-day spending, and even from their primary retirement accounts. And research on the endowment effect explains part of why this fund often stays private, even from a spouse. Once a specific number becomes known, it becomes a reference point other decisions get measured against. A temptation to dip into just this once, a number a well-meaning family member might quietly factor into their own assumptions about what help is available. Keeping it private isn't about deception. It's about keeping the fund exactly what it was built to be, untouched, until the day it's genuinely needed. Think about the retired electrician who, for 15 years, quietly set aside a small amount from every paycheck into an account only he knew about, not hidden from his wife out of mistrust, but simply never mentioned, because there was never a reason to bring it up. When his father-in-law needed emergency surgery not covered by insurance, he was able to help without a single conversation about where the money would come from, without disrupting a single other plan they'd built together. His wife learned about the account that day, and instead of feeling shut out, she felt something closer to relief, grateful that somewhere along the way, her husband had quietly prepared for a crisis neither of them saw coming. Think about the man who built his private reserve, specifically so he'd never have to ask his adult children for help, no matter what happened. He'd watched a friend, in his final years, become financially dependent on children who loved him but resented the strain, and he decided early that his own children would never carry that burden. The fund wasn't about hiding money from his family. It was a gift to them, built years in advance, the gift of never having to worry about him. Think about the widow whose late husband, only after he passed, revealed through his paperwork a modest reserve she'd never known existed, set aside specifically to cover funeral costs and the first few months of adjustment, so she wouldn't have to make a single major financial decision while grieving. She found a short note with it. "This is so you don't have to think about money right now. Everything else can wait," she says. Even now, it was the most quietly loving thing he ever did for her. Think about the man who kept his reserves specifically separate from his main investments, in cash, earning almost nothing in interest, fully aware he was losing potential growth by doing so. Friends occasionally teased him about it, suggesting he should invest it more aggressively. He always gave the same calm answer: "An emergency fund that's tied up in the market isn't an emergency fund. It's just another investment, vulnerable at exactly the moment he'd need it most. He'd rather earn nothing on it and have it be reliably, boringly there." Every one of these men shares the same quiet truth underneath their private reserve. He isn't afraid of a crisis. He refuses to let a crisis catch him unprepared. None of this requires a dramatic financial overhaul. It requires a small, consistent decision, made quietly, over years. A man sets aside a little, automatically, before he ever sees the rest of his money, because real wealth begins where dependence on fortune ends, and an emergency fund is simply Seneca's warning, translated into a bank statement. A man keeps the fund separate and untouched, resisting even reasonable-sounding temptations to invest it more aggressively, because he understands that money is a tool, freedom is the goal, and freedom, in a crisis, depends entirely on money actually being there when it's needed, not tied up chasing a slightly better return. A man doesn't advertise the fund's existence or its size, even to people he loves, because he's learned that the wisest senior men protect their peace before they protect their pride. And a private reserve stays useful precisely because it stays private, free from other people's expectations or assumptions about what it's for. A man builds this habit quietly, without ceremony, because a quiet bank account is often stronger than a loud lifestyle. And nowhere is that truer than in the account nobody else even knows exists. An emergency fund no one knows about was never really about secrecy. It was about sovereignty. A man's quiet insurance policy against the one thing Seneca warned about 2,000 years ago, relying on fortune to always cooperate. Fortune, of course, never promises that. The wise senior man simply stopped waiting for the promise and built his own instead. The richest senior men rarely feel the need to prove they are prepared. They simply are, quietly, in ways most people around them will never fully see, and honestly, were never meant to. A peaceful life is the greatest return on investment, and sometimes the clearest proof of that peace isn't visible in a man's lifestyle at all. It's sitting quietly in an account he hopes he'll never have to use, and sleeps better every night knowing it's there. So we'd love to hear from you. Do you keep a private reserve of your own? What crisis, big or small, has it helped you weather without disrupting the rest of your life? And if you don't have one yet, what's stopping you from starting today? Share it in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another man needs to hear before his own crisis arrives.